you want freedom. You want to be able to allow teams to work in a way that you think that is responsible without them, crossing the street and getting hit by a car, right? NX is configurable. You can basically configure inputs and outputs. The average CI time alone is upwards of 90 to 95% that they're saving by switching to NX. So people are coming in with 2-hour builds and are getting it down 15 minutes, something like that.
React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Łukasz Kluziński, software engineer at Callstack, and your podcast host. Today with me is Jordan Powell from NX, and we'll be talking about monorepos. Hello, Jordan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to talk about this subject because there's so many things that I don't know about it, so I'm eager to learn. But please treat me as a person that knows Yarn workspaces, maybe a little bit of Lerna, and then please fill in the gaps for me as we go ahead with this topic. Maybe let's start by you introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background maybe, and then what do you do at NX?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm super honored to be on the podcast today.
Of course.
My name is Jordan Powell. I'm a developer productivity engineer for the company Narwhal. We created the tool called NX. That's how most people know us. I've been in this role for about 6 months. Previous to that, I was a developer experience engineer at Cypress. So I spent the last 3 years prior to this working in the testing space. So I've one of the few people in the world that like testing and thought a lot about testing. But I've, even predating my time at Cypress, I was an engineer. I worked a lot in the Angular space. Love React as well. And one of the things that I fell in love with back in 2017, 2018 was two tools, was one Cypress and one NX. When I saw both of those at a conference, and I was like, these are so cool. This is awesome, right? And coincidentally, I had the opportunity to work for both of them. So for me, it's it's much easier
don't put
to work
yourself
for a company
down.
You believe in, right?
It's probably not coincidentally. You actively searched for those kind of jobs, and then
Sure.
you were interested in it. So
Yeah.
It's funny you said that not a lot of people likes testing, because I like testing, and just recently I had a talk at App.js in Krakow in Poland, talking about scale of React and React Native applications, and then monorepos, all of those kind of tools, and then testing inside it is such a important part of building at scale. And then I think it's really fitting that you went from testing to building monorepos, because testing is such a big part of the tooling for monorepos, such a big part of why we even need to have those kind of structures.
Absolutely. And to be honest with you, it's probably, if I had to pinpoint the greatest pain with all of the people we work with, at least from my experience, it's testing within the monorepo. That's the biggest pain point. So that's where I could bring some of my sort of experience and history to
war stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's put a pin in that, because that's a part of the episode that I definitely want to talk about, and then how we can structure our repositories to better take advantage of what monorepos and NX gives us in order to selectively test, blah blah blah, all of that.
Yeah.
Let's start with laying the ground for what the monorepo even is, right? So we've all heard the stories, all in the JS world, the modern JS tooling monorepo. It came from work at Facebook and work at Google, and all of those huge corporations, huge products in early 2000s, when they built their own proprietary systems to manage their monorepo. Are you aware of any previous examples or previous work, not necessarily in front end on JS space, but software development in general, where those kind of structures came about?
That's a great question. I would say, to be honest with you, I couldn't necessarily speak to specific examples, but what I would say is I think one of the misnomers with monorepos and a lot of the the hesitancy to adopt them to begin with is most people think a monorepo is sort of synonymous with a monolith, right? And so we used to build these massive monolith applications where it's just like this painful thing where we just shove everything into this large bucket and there is no real boundaries. And I think that in a lot of ways, like that's where when we started doing that, we kind of went down this road of like, well, let's create domain-driven development and let's create these ways to separate our monoliths so it's not so painful. And then we kind of went into this like monoliths are terrible. Let's just go like pivot super hard right, and let's just make a repo for everything, and let's make microservices, and everything is its own independent thing. And then, I think that the reality is we probably want something in the middle where we have structure, but we also want freedom, right? We kind of want both.
Yeah, it's such a great point that you made, that monorepos by default, I think they mean, like in our minds, they mean monolithic. They mean we don't have, if you have just a monorepo, it means that you have no structure in it, like no tooling in it. Because then if you have NX or turborepo or like other solutions, then it becomes NX monorepo. It's not just monorepo, right? So yeah, I think we talked a little bit before this podcast that NX was founded by people that used to work at Google, and they saw the pains that came with working with so many with such a big code base. So can you tell us a few words about like the early days of NX?
So our two founders, Jeff and Victor, they actually used to work on the Angular team in Google, and they basically tell the story of how, at Google is, massive in a massive organization, right? And they use a monorepo, and I think they would argue that they do it well, but they sort of noticed this thing where there was a significant amount of resources and teams just sort of dedicated to making sure the experience of working within all of these lines of business and this massive repo worked. And that's really what inspired them to basically create their own tool that said, I think we could make something that works for any size organization. Because, one of the things that there's actually a paper by Nicholas, I think Bruce or Brous is how you pronounce it, but he begins to talk about the issue of monorepos and polyrepos. And one of the things is he did some studies on Microsoft and Google and sort of why they transitioned to a monorepo. And one of the things that they noticed is basically you kind of have to pick a path, right? Either one can be painful. Like if you completely decentralize everything and like there's a repo for everything, you have a lot of freedom, you can move quickly, but there's a pretty severe trade-off because you ultimately it's very difficult to have any insight into what the rest of the organization is doing. Whereas, a monorepo and a monolithic standpoint, it is also painful, or can be if it's not done right, because it just slows down progress. And so one of the things that they found is like Microsoft, there's this quote saying that basically that once that said they observed that a polyrepo structure fostered a siloed culture. So basically, my team owns this, and that's the only thing I care about, and so that ended up becoming like a lot of finger pointing, and that they said that transitioning to a monorepo allowed them to provide a better developer experience. And the cool thing about that is basically what we found out is that the correlation from a business standpoint is basically that a poor DX causes business problems. So if you have a developer experience that is poor, you're going to have deployment like infrequencies. It's going to go down. Your lead time to change is going to increase. Your mean time to recovery, so fixing something, is going to be poor. Employee retention rate, all those things ultimately create
I was going to say
problems.
that. I really appreciate how you pointed out all of those business metrics, like mean time to recover and etc. Let's definitely link that as its separate chapter in YouTube. but also
Okay.
like developer frustration. Like that's what matters to me when I manage teams and I see that our project is not set up correctly, and we have spent cycles and cycles of like fighting with those like small inefficiencies in our setup. It drives people crazy. And like, if we are not fixing that consciously, then we are losing focus of developers. Then we are losing developers. They just go to have a lunch, just waiting for all of those like builds, all of those tests to either turn green, and probably not turn green, but just being flaky and turn red. So that's a good point.
And just to finish that super quick is what we realize is that poor developer experience leads to poor business problems, and poor business problems being like it's slower time to market. You're going to miss opportunities in the market. You're going to have excess costs. So you're increasing your compute. You're going to end up having to hire more people. You're going to lose revenue. And then ultimately those lead to bad business outcomes. So what we found is it's a hard sort of thing to quantify from a business standpoint, but these businesses found in this report is basically that the more you can increase your developer experience, the more it has secondary and third order effects on productivity for your business.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's not easily quantifiable, but like it also makes sense. Like it just makes sense conceptually. If you have a smooth path from development to production, it's gonna be easier to ship something. That's all. That's all it is. Building for multiple platforms is the easy part. Maintaining it at scale is where teams struggle. At Callstack, we specialize in designing monorepos that scale. Shared libraries, ownership rules, targeted builds, and tooling that respects your architecture. From high-growth teams to global streaming products, we've seen how the right structure can reduce friction, unify delivery, and unlock serious velocity. Reach out if you're ready to build systems that move as fast as your teams. The war stories that you mentioned before. I want to hear about that. Maybe you can talk about some of your clients that you have, or some of the your own experiences with monorepos, some experiences from open source that you know about that cover the like a certain functionality or certain enabler for some functionality in monorepo. Great. So I will start with my experience. Back in, I think, 2018, I started playing around with Yarn workspaces. I was a React Native dev. I wanted to do some React Native web project and then React Native project, and it wasn't even backend in it, like just like front end and mobile app. I started playing around with monorepos. Definitely, I shared a lot of like business logic and maybe some styles, something like very easy. And I guess this is the starting point for many of our listeners of like React Native projects. We just want to have an easy path of co-locating the same files, of sharing the same utility between those kind of structures that really are the same, like front end and mobile, those are the same, or types between backend and front end, those are like the same. Okay, so that's my experience. So now let's tie it into like that's the basic functionality of monorepo, right? How does it work in like NX versus how does it work in some other like tooling out there?
So I would say NX it's similar in the sense of like it gives you some of the same features as like a Yarn workspace. You mentioned Lerna earlier. Lerna actually was a kind of like a kind of built upon, I think, in a lot of ways, Yarn workspaces. It actually was deprecated, I think, about 3 years ago, something like that. And actually, NX is now stewarding that. So you actually have NX caching and really integrates pretty well inside of Lerna. So if you're using Lerna today and you're on, I think 5 is the one that NX is sort of in it by default, you're pretty much using a lot of NX features by itself. But I guess at the end of the day, like NX, it's going to keep a graph of everything. So with Yarn workspaces, it's more or less just doing sort of the sim linking between parts of your repo, between, like you mentioned, your React Native web and your React like native mobile, like, or styles in a separate library, things like that. So it can be good for something like that, but ultimately, one of the things that's really powerful is about NX keeps a graph, and the NX graph is really kind of the I would say kind of the engine that really makes the entire tool work. And so what it does is it literally creates a graph of every sort of project or application in your app. And then it has essentially within it, it knows all the targets or like essentially like commands it can run. So maybe you have to build something, you have to test something, you lint or, any sort of executable target within inside of it, it knows all those things. So the power in that is that if you want to, like in a non sort of NX repo where you have this monolithic monorepo, if you want to ensure that everything works, you have to build your entire project. You have to build an application that wasn't even touched. And if you have a very large monolith, that could be very painful. Where NX has, because it has this graph, it also can then keep essentially an affected scope of what was changed. So on any sort of command that's run or anytime you make change to source code, it then knows, okay, you changed this library, and because of that, it then has this effect on that graph. So then in CI, you can essentially just say, run these targets that were affected, and then it knows to run all those things and only run those things. So you get a very, at the base level, you're getting like the benefits of the monolith, knowing that you're not breaking parts, but you're getting kind of the benefits of like a polyrepo because you're only running the things that were affected, right? That's what I would say is kind of like the graph is kind of the main, like, I guess, benefit from it. And I would say like a great sort of example of this in play is, say you have like a design library, you have a design system inside your organization. If I've been down this path where it's like you found a little bug, maybe you have a new ticket that comes in and the button needs to have this, whatever, like a new,
it should be centered.
Color. Exactly. Some little deviation, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a polyrepo setup, you have to then go to that. You either have to tell that team, hey, I need this change for my ticket and it's blocking my ticket. And then basically you're blocked, right? Or you have to go and say, I'll do it for you, no problem. Assuming that you're allowed to do that, you then go and you make the change, and then you have to wait for them to approve it.
And then procedures, and then you have the repo, and then you have all of the accesses, and then there are 15 repos like that in your organization, and not just like 3 different teams.
Yes. And then assuming it gets put in, then you're like, okay, now I need to update my dependency on that inside of my project. And what happens if you have 50 projects that depend upon it? So then that's where this problem just becomes super, like, it proliferates.
And then, like, that's such a great example because, like, if you have this, like you said, your example was the styling
of a button.
Yeah. So you want to style that button. That button is used in 15 of your products on like hundreds and hundreds of surfaces. And then, like, this change will impact all of your targets, probably. Yeah. Some other, and like you want to rebuild and retest and redeploy all of those targets. Some other change may impact just one of those, right? So you don't want to do all those kind of, all that time-consuming, resource-consuming work on all of them. And in order to like orchestrate that without the open source tooling, without the NX or Turborepo or other tooling, it's gonna be really, really hard to build that dependency graph yourself and that like trigger based task yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is that our founders saw this problem and they said let's make a product that solves this problem. So
about that graph, so in my like usual workflow, do I configure all of that like in some kind of configuration file, or I just do import from styles? And then if that imported file is used in one of the targets, the graph is built automatically for me?
The answer is yes. It's both, right? So ultimately, NX is configurable. You can basically configure inputs and outputs. So you can say that this target or this project is like, for example, if you have a React library, you say, if any of my TypeScript or my TSX files change within this folder, this library, like root level library folder, then I want to make sure anytime those change that it rebuilds. I also want to make sure if any of my styles change that it has to rebuild. But if one of my spec files changes, I don't need to rebuild it. I just need to make sure my tests are invalidated. So you can configure NX to basically sort of do those nuances. Now, by default, it has a lot of these defaults, so you don't have to like necessarily go through the mental gymnastics of how do I set this. So a lot of this is just kind of by default, but you can configure it. But then the graph is generated by default. So basically, it'll read all the inputs and those targets throughout all your projects, and it will then generate that graph for you.
So to recap, it will do a lot of things on its own, and then I can opt in, opt out of certain behaviors as I wish.
Yep, NX tries to be as opinionless as possible, like let you have the opinions, but that's just provide the guardrails and the structure to be able to, have fun.
Okay, if I wanted to start with NX, and I did that like just a couple of days and couple of hours ago, I started a new project, but like if I wanted to do from scratch, like how do I start playing around with it?
You can do it with Homebrew. You can just brew install NX. The other thing is because NX is now, it used to just be a front-end only tool, but it's now also we now support Java. We now support, we have Python libraries. We have .NET. So we have back-end tooling, but primarily most people are used to using it in Node. So you would just do npx create NX workspace, and it will walk you through some prompts of, do you want an empty workspace? Do you want it configured with like a React defaults or Angular or things like that? So that's kind of the best way if you're starting on a greenfield project. And I think the other important thing to note is that there's two other ways that I think is really powerful that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is if you already have a project. So say you already have a Yarn workspace, or maybe just a React, create React app or something like that, or maybe use V to new up a project. You can just inside of it do NX init, and it will basically initialize NX inside of your existing repo. It'll just wrap everything, and you can do it like that. Or you can also you can use NX import, and it will import another project into this project, into your current project. So those two tools, init and import, are a great way to take something that's already in existence and sort of add it into NX.
Okay, so then I do the npx create NX workspace. I get a clean React Native project. The project structure is a little bit different to what I know from other tools, from like Community CLI or Expo. So maybe walk me through like what we get when we run that command. Like we get the more or less standard boilerplate for React Native, but like what do we get on top of that we need to be aware of? And then like how do we plug in another target to that initial like workspace?
Depending upon what type of project you select when you're initializing it, those will create different folder structures. So basically those are kind of what we found is kind of like the general consensus across the community of how people like to structure those things. But at the end of the day, NX doesn't care. NX can basically, you can configure it to use any structure you prefer at all. So like any of those things, NX can handle. But in terms of, so in your case, if it didn't work the way you like it, you can easily change it around, and NX can easily figure that out. We actually have a generator that's a NX move generator. So you just tell NX, hey, move this project to here, and that will then do all the orchestrating, so you don't even have to do any of that yourself. And then if you want to create a target, NX has this idea of a plugin. So and you don't have to do this, but essentially what it will do is for example, if you're using Vita, something like that, or any type of, maybe you're using Playwright or Cypress, something like that. We have our own plugins, or basically wrap those, and essentially when you try to call, say, test or an end-to-end on those things, it will basically invoke Cypress or Playwright, but it will do it and NX will sort of do its magic. It will, it then has context to the graph. But ultimately, it's just invoking like the original tooling. So NX used to be much more opinionated on you have to have everything set up in a certain way, but we've really sort of unwound that, and it's a lot less opinionated in that standpoint.
Okay. So yeah, what I want to do is like walk us through like the usual software lifecycle flow. So I created that project, right? Let's say that's a project, like that's the basic front end mobile and then some backend thing. Yep. Walk me through how I collaborate with others on this.
Sure. So
and you can use war stories.
Oh, okay, great. Well, one of the things I think that is cool is I like to use the analogy of like I'm a parent, so I have children, and one of the things that I think is important is like I don't want to be a controlling parent, right? I don't want my kids to feel like they can't do anything, but I also want to make sure they're protected, right? So when they're a little baby, I maybe put them in my crib and I say, you can play in this crib as long as you're inside this crib, you're safe, right? But then as they get a little older, I say, okay, you can play in your room, but don't go outside this room and you're safe. And then maybe you could play in the backyard. And then eventually you're like, okay, now you can cross the street and go to the neighbor's house and play, something like that, right? So this is kind of the way I like to think about NX, and that you want freedom. You want to be able to allow teams to work in a way that you think that is responsible without them, crossing the street and getting hit by a car, right? That sort of thing. So what we can do is NX, each project you can assign like an owner to, or you can scope it to say you have that front end project. You can tag either at front end, or it could be Tiger Team or Alpha Team or whatever the name of your team or specific person owns this project. And then your back end, you can give them a separate name and scope, something like that. Same thing with your mobile team. You can design those as all separate scopes. And then one of the cool things is that NX has this idea of conformance. So we have this tool that essentially will make sure you can set up rules that say, like, for example, the front end can never import something from the back end, or the back end can never import from the front end, or that when a new project is created, that someone has to own it, right? You can't just create it and then there's no owner for it. So those are all the types of kind of guardrails that you can sort of set up pretty easily that sort of make sure that your DX is not, I guess, decreasing, and you're also, but you're able to still like be functional, and you're able to move quickly in that software development lifecycle. So
I love how you connected the metaphor of like caring parent with then team ownership. That's great. And then those were the war stories.
Yeah.
How does it work like on the actual let's say implementation level? Like, who do I assign? Is it like a GitHub handle that I'm assigning that ownership to, or is it like what is it?
Yeah. So one of the cool things is then if you set up exactly how we talked about with putting owners on the projects and setting up those conformance rules, you can also basically integrate it directly with code owners. So what NX will do is it'll automatically on the fly generate your code owner's file for you. So anytime you go to commit or something like that, it runs a sync command, and it will look at your graph, look at all the owners, and it will basically generate that code owner's file for you. So that way, when you push that commit, it will then say, this was what was affected, and this team owns it, and this team needs to then approve of this pull request, something like that.
Okay.
So one of the challenges of the code owners thing, like today, is like you have to maintain it by hand, right? Like if you create something or something
I hate
changes,
this file. Like
exactly.
the code owner's file, I hate it. Like the intention is great. When it works,
yes.
It's great. But then that file gets blown out of proportion.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot.
But this is what's great is like you don't really have to think about it. It's just like whoever owns, as long as someone has to own your projects, and as long as like the ownership doesn't change, then like it's always in sync, which is great.
Cool. So then let's say I develop our backend, right? So I go to our GitHub, I get that repository, I do git clone. Do I clone all of the like front ends and mobiles and other parts as well? Or can I just like scope my own local repository to to the fragments that I care about, that I needed for my work?
There's two ways to do this. Basically, some would say the right way and the wrong way. I will be maybe a little less opinionated, but I would say I'd lean towards one strategy. But basically, you can create in similar to like a Yarn workspace where every library, like the back end and the front end, have their own like node modules or own dependencies within them, and maybe you have to run a install at the root and hoist all those up or something like that. There's different ways to sort of solve these problems. With NX, you can do that. We actually generally prefer to have a one root level like dependencies. There's several reasons for that. Mainly, like it's much easier to keep. If you have a massive team and you're all using React and there's a new version of React, then it's much easier to do migration across. Everyone's on the same version, but if you're on 8 different versions, then it's like impossible to, keep everyone up to date. And then one team slows down the other team and so forth. So this is where, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, there you could do both ways, but ultimately you can have like in the case of Node, you could have a one root level no modules, or you can separate them.
Okay. That's a nice implementation detail, actually. So let me redirect the discussion that way. If I have like 3 different front ends, can I use different versions of React on all of them?
You could, yes.
But then I'm losing some of the benefits of actually using the monorepo structure, so I cannot like share that package, share the types, etc.
Exactly. So that's one of the things. The other thing is NX for the main frameworks we have our own plugins for. So we have React and Angular and all the things, right? We actually create migration generators between major versions. So anytime there's a new version of React, we will actually write a migration generator that will cover all the breaking changes and things like that. So, so things like that are it may not catch every single edge case, but it'll get you like, depending upon your instance, it's going to get you 90-95% of the way, if not all the way there, depending upon how damaging those, those breaking changes are. But I think that's another big benefit, because like you said, if they're all in separate versions, then you kind of lose some of the benefits of having it all on one. But the short answer, yes, you could do it that way.
You're listening to React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform with React and React Native.
I want to ask you about the war stories again. Another anecdote, maybe, if you can give me an example of like the most complicated, like not Google or Facebook scale, but something that your clients use or something that you are aware of in like open source or like out there that is very complicated in terms of like monorepo setup, like 5 different backends, 5 different front ends, mobile app, AI plugin or whatever. Like, how would you describe that kind of like very large scale complicated scenario? And if you can like name the repository so that our listeners can go there and check it out themselves.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I could give you a specific example, but I will say like we have like enterprise customers of NX and NX Cloud that have literally like thousands, if not 10,000s of libraries in their graph, like massive amounts of projects. And some of those are breaking down every component is its own library because they want to be able to basically distribute every single part of their graph in a very distributed way. Some people think that's a little overkill from a DX standpoint, so it's kind of up to you how much you want to distribute that. So there's kind of like specific implementation things. I would say like one that you could just go to. I don't know if I have an example of that, but I've seen some massive projects. And one of the cool things is like I'll work with customers that come in and are NX users that are like, our builds are, I don't know, an hour plus long. And I've actually been working on this project where I'm running like anecdotal, basically like statistical analysis across all of our customers that before NX and NX Cloud and after. And the average like CI time alone is upwards of 90 to 95% that they're saving by switching to NX. So like people are coming in with 2-hour builds and are getting it down like 15 minutes, something like that, which is pretty crazy. Most people are 10 minutes or under in a lot of cases for an entire monorepo. And of course, there's a lot of caveats to all of that. But yeah, I don't know if it's the answer you're looking for, but I've seen some pretty big projects out there.
I think like you said, there are caveats there. I think so. We recently released something that's called React Native Enterprise Framework, where we do cloud builds for native targets. And then like the benefit is you don't have to spend 30 minutes building that native target if you don't need that native build again because you have it cached because your native dependencies and your native code is not changing. That's a very similar pattern, but on much lower scale than like something like NX does. But then like, again, the caveat is usually you save from 30 to 3 minutes, not always, but like usually 95% of the time.
Yeah.
Talking about your clients and about the big project that you support, can you think about like the functionality that you've added to your product based on something that you saw as a necessity for like one of those like bigger large scale projects?
One of the features with NX Cloud, so we have NX, which is open source, and then we have a cloud sort of offering on top of that. One of the features that we added to that is something called distributed task execution. It's always a mouthful to say. I always just say DTE.
I've read up about it. It's great. Please explain.
Yeah. So basically, this is something we end up solving or realizing with working with customers is like, if you have this massive project and massive graph, if you have a small change in a pull request or something like that, like, you know, sometimes the builds and your pipeline don't take that long, but they're, especially in the worst case scenarios where you have something that affects everything, then those builds take a really long time. And so what NX Cloud can reference the NX graph that we talked about, and any set of change, it knows what needs to be built. And so what NX Cloud with distributed task execution does is essentially takes like almost like a queue and it's an orchestrator. So what it'll say is, this is like a giant list of things that need to be run, and NX knows the order in which it needs to be run. So it will then, you then just say, hey, I want to spin up X amount of machines. Maybe they're large machines, maybe they're extra large or small or medium. And then NX will then distribute them across those machines in the order in which they need to be run. So that way it's like the most, like you're kind of like getting the most like bang for your buck in terms of like kind of CI speed. So, and the cool thing is like you can make it dynamic. So if you have a small change, maybe you want to distribute across 3 machines. If you have a large change, maybe you want to, distribute across 12 machines, something like that. But the cool thing is like, you're not like waiting for tasks to finish, because you like, maybe your tests depend upon your build. So you need to build first, but you could also be linting or doing other things while you're waiting for your build to run. So instead of like having to manually orchestrate that in your CI and then in your pipeline, and then you have to basically rely upon it to do it the same way every single time, NX is almost like a dynamic thing where it's like, on this given set of changes, run it the most efficient way possible. And that's basically what distributed task execution is doing for us.
I know that the metaphor, like the correlation, will be wrong, but this reminds me of Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
That like you get the scale on demand. You are able to like scale up your infrastructure on demand according to your needs. You mentioned testing, and I know that we were going to talk about testing. So let's talk about testing now. So NX and like monorepos in general, like they allow us to put everything together in the same place, and then like our tests like coexist there as well. And then we want to be testing only what's necessary, right? So like walk us through, we went over like project creation, then collaboration, then we went through some like bigger examples. Now let's talk about testing and then maybe releasing. And I guess like releasing, we also covered like in the previous examples of like scaling. So let's talk about testing. Tell us something about that. Like how is that a part of like monorepo experience?
I would say, especially when you think end-to-end testing, like it's going to be the most valuable test that you write, but it's going to be the longest, like most painful. It's going to cost you the most. It's going to be the hardest to write generally, and it's going to be generally the most flaky, and generally it takes the longest to run, right? But it's going to give you the most value. So ultimately,
and also like expensive to set up, because like you have to like connect to some emulators of like or like browsers or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So like you don't want to do that unless like you don't want to do that work unless you have to, right? So in the case of, you want to make sure, if as a developer, when I'm writing a feature or submitting a pull request, I want to feel confident that it's not breaking, right? I remember like when I working at Cypress, and I would like work on a feature, and I'd be like, I'm really nervous that like because 5 million people is going to download that in a week, right? It's a lot of downloads, and I'm like, I get really nervous. I'm like, I really relied upon this test because there's a lot of things at play that I wasn't aware of, and so testing, you want to like, it's like a safety net, at least for me. So I was like, okay, you want to make sure when you're writing a test that it is providing you the assurance, like, okay, you're safe. This change isn't breaking something that you're unaware of. But you don't want to run those tests if what you changed had no effect on something way over some other team or some other project or system that's unrelated, right? So that's one of the things that is really nice about it. But then the other thing, when we talked about like distributed task execution, is that NX will also basically automatically split you can set it up to automatically split your tests. So if you have a Playwright project, maybe you have 10 of them across your app, and maybe you have, say, 10 tests within side of each of those 10 projects. So what NX will do is, instead of running Playwright end-to-end tasks 10 times, what it will do is basically shard those tests into 10 separate targets for each one. So essentially 100 targets. So it will then distribute them across however many machines you did. And you can only spin up your, like you said, the maybe like a dev server or whatever you have to do to run those tests. You could spin that up one time, leave that running, and then let those other 100 targets that it dynamically spun up run against it. And it's just like another example of how you can dynamically scale with like very easily without like all the pain point of having to manually do this and maintain it and so forth.
And then like all of that, the previous section, not about the scale and task distribution, but like about selective testing, is based on that like graph that is constructed automatically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if I'm a front end developer and I make a change to the front end library, I don't need to retest the back end library because this is like I didn't touch anything, right?
Yeah.
So that's it's leveraging that graph to make those decisions.
Where can people find the information about NX, and what do you want them to like read first? What are the most differentiating factors about NX from like regular monorepo or like from other solution? What are you the most proud of that you want people to like go and read about first?
I would say the place I would definitely recommend first is either nx.dev, which is our website. We have really good documentation, I think. We have a lot of like sort of guides and examples of how to do a lot of things, right? Like, NX is pretty broad in terms of the type of user we have. So we have a pretty good sort of scope of help in that regards. The other thing I would say is our YouTube has a lot of good content around like practical, like how we solve this problem or things like that. And then to answer the other question, I would say is one of the things that I don't think it was intentional, but one of the things that we are kind of really realizing internally at NX is the bigger long tail play of NX. I think the value is when you start to think of AI and when you bring AI into the picture. So in a distributed polyrepo setup, you have all these, we talked about the benefits of it, but one of the things we didn't talk about is how, me as a developer, I don't have context to what this other repo is doing, right? But also my AI agent has no context of it either. So if you give the graph to an NX agent, it can then give you a much better context to make smarter decisions for you and recommendations, because it's not going to recommend something that would contradict all the other things in your project. But if you just gave it the scope of this one poly repo, it would probably miss the scope of, everything else because it doesn't have that context. So I think that's the thing that, like, a long-term play, I think, is we're just starting to kind of really see it. I don't think it was never the intention originally. It was like, this is like a long-term AI plan, but I think that we're, as cliche as it is, I actually think it is like super powerful, and the teams that are leveraging it are really starting to see the benefits of that.
Oh, definitely. Like, so you stole my next question. So that was,
okay,
I was going to ask you about the AI in the future for like monorepos and stuff. But like working with AI agents, especially for coding, those kind of patterns like started to emerge, that you have like those like LLMs, MD files, or like project structure files, or all of that like added context. And then if you plug it into the tools that you're creating, we can have all of that like basically for free, so that like the understanding and the context can be even bigger.
Yeah, and so we actually have an MCP server. So and then we feed it our docs, we feed the graph, all that to it. So one of the cool things is, like, recently, I didn't even realize we released this feature, but I was working on a project and I pushed up a PR and it failed, and I got this notification inside of Cursor or VS Code, whatever I was doing, and it was telling me, hey, your pipeline failed, click here. And it went there and it's like, hey, it failed. And then I went back to Cursor and it was like, do you want me to try to fix it? And then, like, literally it took the context from the run, because we could feed it back into the model, and it has the context of our workspace graph, and it basically told me what I needed to do to fix it. And I didn't even have to like really do anything. I was like, this is awesome, right? And this is just all sort of like scratching the surface on like a practical use case of what, like, the power of NX when it comes to AI.
And I feel like we only scratch the surface on like monorepos and NX functionalities. In my notes here, I have a bunch of other examples of functionality for monorepo and from NX. But like, I think that gives us a good baseline, good base knowledge for like what monorepos are, like how do you use them, and like why should you like go for those like better tools than trying to like replicate just like with Yarn workspaces or whatever. Thank you, Jordan, so much. I really had a nice conversation with you. Have a blast talking with you today. Thanks everyone for listening and for watching us on YouTube and other platforms. Give us your feedback. Like if you want to know something more from this episode, reach out to us on YouTube or on other platforms. You can reach out to Jordan as well. He's findable on the web. We'll put the notes in the show notes about his info. And yeah, follow us on social media, follow us our newsletter. We will let you know about the other episodes that we have. Jordan, do you want to like say something at the end of this?
No, I just want to say thanks for having me. The other just thing I think it's important to note is say I didn't sell you on a monorepo today. It's okay. Like, we actually do have like, you can use NX in a polyrepo structure too. You don't get all the benefits, but there is some. So I would say, so if I didn't sell you on a monorepo, that's okay. Like, you still want to try out NX, like, I would say go ahead and give it a try.
It's really easy. I did that in few minutes. Start up the project that you are most familiar with and just start playing around. Again, thanks everyone, and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.